Microsoft's acquisition of Rare was a really strange moment in gaming history, wasn't it? Nintendo had such a strong working relationship with Rare during the Super Nintendo and most of the N64 era, and now here Rare was going over to one of Nintendo's biggest competitors. I myself couldn't exactly grasp the magnitude of this event on account of the fact that I was 1 year old at the time, but it left a lot of fans wondering what was next for, well, any of Rare's IPs, honestly. Not to mention the games they were making for the GameCube. Well, most of them were either made into different games or scrapped entirely, or both. The only exception to this seems to be Grabbed by the Ghoulies. And then, of course, there's Banjo-Threeie. For the longest time, fans had assumed that Rare always had this game in the works because of Gruntilda's infamous line at the end of Banjo-Tooie, but as we've come to find out, Rare did not originally plan to make a follow-up to Banjo-Tooie. It wasn't until the folks at Rare saw the huge leap in technical power between the N64 and the original Xbox that they started imagining what a 3D platformer could be like on the newer hardware. So, funnily enough, we probably wouldn't have ended up getting this game if it wasn't for the Microsoft buyout. Go figure. A hop, skip, and a 3-year dev cycle later, and Banjo-Threeie was unleashed upon the public. It did well enough commercially, but reception-wise it ran that classic gambit of, and everyone please say it with me now, people loved the game at first for the amount of content it had, but then came to hate it for being too loaded, and now people are mostly divided on it. So where do I myself stand on the game? Well, let me tell ya. Three years after the events of Banjo-Tooie, Gruntilda returns as a ghost so that she can curse the whole of Spiral Mountain, trapping the wonderful Green Hills in an eternal winter. Banjo and Kazooie, as they are known to do, set off on an adventure to collect a bunch of shiny crap and put an end to Grunty's plans once again. I'm wondering if Gruntilda returning as a spirit was at all influenced by Grunty's revenge. Or maybe it was just a coincidence because hey, you can't exactly have your super epic final boss be a skeletal head with no powers. Banjo and Kazooie's quest leads them to the Jinjo Valley, an old ancestral home of the Jinjos. And hey, wouldn't you know it, King Jingling is here, and he shows the heroes a way that they can stalk Gruntilda, who, by the way, has gone back to rhyming this time. You see, close by Jinjo Valley lies the Wicked Archipelago, a series of islands that just so happen to have Jiggies to collect. So, you know, it's just like Banjo-Tooie, you know, Jinjo hangout spot over here, and then right next to it is the bigger hub world. You even get your first Jiggy from King Jingling. And oh, look at that. A bunch of the Jinjos have gone missing, and we need to go find them. From here, it's the classic setup. 9 worlds, it's 9 again like in the first game, with 10 Jiggies and 100 notes to collect, as well as a bunch of moves to learn and Jinjos to find, this time with the addition of turquoise, pink, and cream-colored Jinjos, the only exception to this being the Wicked Archipelago, which has 12 Jiggies you get from saving the Jinjos and 8 to be found around the environment, leading to a grand total of 110 Jiggies to find throughout the game. But there's also quite a few familiar faces to run into as well, including Mumbo Jumbo and Humba Wumba, the latter of which having a slightly more culturally sensitive design, who serve pretty much the same purpose they did in the previous game, even using Globos again. You can run into Klungo every now and again. If you swing by his arcade, you can play a couple mini-games. They're alright. There's also Bottles, who doesn't teach moves anymore, but will give you hints on certain objectives if you ask him, as well as Jam Jars, who will let you read up on how to use the moves you start with. And on that note, let's address one of the biggest criticisms levied against this game. See, Banjo and Kazooie start with all of the moves they have from the first game, and a good number of the ones they had in Tooie. They can still grab ledges, split up, as well as attacking while split up, shoot eggs while zoomed in, flying and swimming, and shoot different kinds of eggs. Now a lot of the moves from Tooie aren't available from the start, with some being learned later on, and some just straight up missing in action. But with all the new moves you're going to learn, courtesy of new character Dr. Googly, Banjo and Kazooie are going to have more moves than they did by the end of Tooie. So if you were overwhelmed by the amount of abilities in that game, this game's going to make your head spin. Oh, and that's before you factor in Mumbo and the different transformations for each level. It's a lot. And speaking of issues carried over from Banjo-Tooie, some of these levels are bigger than they need to be. Frosted Fjord is probably the worst for this. Oh god, the Cookie Caverns. But Starry Night Heights and Over Underworld, for as much as I like that level, also have their own fair shares of empty space. As a result, objectives where you have to run back and forth across the map, and trust me, you're gonna run into a couple of those, become a bit of a pain in the ass. You can tell the devs at Rare got maybe a little too excited about that fancy new Xbox technology. Gotta cram everything they can onto the one disc. But for what it's worth, the game has both a moves list and an objective checklist in the pause menu that you can access at any time while in a level. And if you've gotten a hint from Bottles on how to complete an objective, you can also check that from the pause screen as well. Kinda makes talking to Jam Jars pointless, but whatever. But when the issues of too many moves and levels that are way too big collide, it's easy to see how people can get overwhelmed. Besides those two big issues, it's mostly just a couple of missions that really suck. Some lowlights for me would include the space shooter segment in Starlight System, which is a cute idea but is way too basic for how long it is. The long as hell fetch quest chain in the Cave of Plunders, and while I do like the boss fight that happens at the end of it, the Fight Club in Starry Night Heights is just a tedious enemy gauntlet. Nothing new for the series, but this one goes on for 3 rounds and the enemies do not change, they just add more. It reminds me of the battle arena challenges in the SpongeBob movie game. Now just imagine putting those in a game that has a third of the enemy variety. But I think you get the idea, not every mission's gonna be a winner. All that being said, and this could just be my bias towards anything Banjo-Kazooie related, but I still really like this game, so why don't we get into some positives instead? For example, the aesthetic presentation. It's nice seeing higher fidelity versions of these characters that don't look like this. Disclaimer, I don't hate nuts and bolts, but god, who the f*** thought this was a good idea? These were definitely the best next-gen models for these characters until Smash Bros. Came around. I mean, it's definitely nostalgia, but there's something about 6th-gen console graphics that just do it for me, you know? And obviously, I don't have to say anything for the sound design, right? I mean, hot take here, Grant Kirkhope makes good music. Oh, but the thing I really want to talk about in terms of aesthetics is the level themes. They got really creative with the kinds of levels that Banjo and Kazooie are going to be exploring this time around. Even level themes that would normally feel routine have fun twists to help them stand out, such as Fruity Falls, this jungle where giant fruit grow from the trees. It even leads you into this juicing factory in a scene suspiciously similar to Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. This game came out first, though. Or how about Frosted Fjord, which is not an ice level, but an ice cream level, full of sweets and dessert foods everywhere. Or how about Romantic Resort, a beach that's connected to a getaway suite where Banjo and Kazooie have to help out the resort staff in order to earn jiggies. It is also here that we see the gap between E for Everyone on Nintendo 64 and E10 Plus on Xbox. And with the more out there level themes, we get fittingly creative missions that really do take advantage of the unique settings, such as the Over Underworld, a level where you have to travel back and forth between a dark, spooky underworld cave and a heavenly cloud kingdom. Having to find Cerberus' favorite chew toys is such a perfectly Banjo-Kazooie thing to do. How about drawing out a constellation by beak-bombing the stars in Starlight System? Or how in Towering Toy Box, you have to split up so that one character can be a piece on a game board and the other character can roll the dice to help them move. It's not the most exciting task, you just play a couple of minigames, but how creative is that? And then there's the game's standout level for me, Abracadabra Academy, a magic academy where it's said that Gruntilda and her sisters, as well as potentially Baron von Ghoul, learned all of their tricks. They even go as far as to call back to Gruntilda's old backstory with Mumbo, as he talks about how he used to be a teacher here. Really cool stuff. But not as cool as Mr. Fit Baby. He's here, he's teaching the students how to fly on broomsticks, it's the best level. Couldn't have been better. I do indeed hate myself. With the hindsight of Nuts and Bolts, it's a little awkward to see Grabbed by the Ghoulies cameos in here. Also, a bunch of the levels are still connected to one another, which I always liked. I loved using the telescope in the city level to find a secret area on the space station. And it's through passages to other levels like this one that we can find your friend and mine, good old Stop and Swap. But we get ahead of ourselves. For now, let's talk about the boss fights. I'd say on average they're a little bit better than they were in Banjo-Tooie. Still nothing game-changing, but, they're fun, and the spectacle is definitely there. I already brought up the fight with Knuckles Duster in Starry Night Heights, and that one was a definite highlight for me. I always love bosses where there's a crowd cheering on the boss, but there's some other cool ones too. Particularly, I enjoyed the fights with the Cauldron in Abracadabra Academy, the Cake Monster in Frosted Fjord, and the Hydra in Over Underworld. These fights are not only cool to watch unfold, but also properly teach you about using the right moves for the right situations, unlike Tooie's bosses, which were mostly just about shooting the right type of egg at the right time. Oh, and on the topic of moves, there are a lot of them, as we've established. With as many as there are, there's definitely going to be some stinkers. Like, Breagle Buzzsaw is basically just a key for whenever you find these specific kinds of cracked walls. Tightrope Tiptoe is just walking on tightropes, that kind of stuff. But there are some standouts, like Banjo being able to use his backpack to swing off of hooks. I usually really love grappling hook stuff in video games. The electric eggs, returning from Grunty's Revenge, as well as the brand new poison eggs were both pretty cool additions, and they actually switched up the Breagle Blaster mode so that you can switch to it at any point, with the caveat being that you can't jump while using it, kinda making it work more like how the guns did in Donkey Kong 64. And speaking of changing your moveset, how about those transformations? Once again, there's one in each level, this time including the likes of a UFO, a toy car, a snowman, a fire hydrant, and even a devil. Something you can definitely give Threeie over the first game is that all of the transformations could defend themselves, except for the TNT detonator, that one still kinda sucks. Thankfully, that's a change that remained in Banjo-Threeie. Even Mumbo has a new move. He can shoot projectiles now. It's still an improvement. Just like in Threeie though, there's a secret transformation tied to Stop and Swap. Find the ice key in Frosted Fjord's Sprinkle Haven, run down to this pirate playset in Towering Toy Box, which will take you to a secret vault inside the Cave of Plunders, wherein you'll find a secret green Globo. Take it to Humba Wumba in the hub world, and instead of Dragon Kazooie, this time we get Werewolf Banjo. He gets these upgraded punch and roll attacks, he can climb ledges faster, and that's about it. Like Dragon Kazooie, it's more so just a nice convenience to have. At least he's kinda cool looking. And he also came around at such a perfect time to get a ton of edgy fan art dedicated to him that I'm convinced that's what Rare had in mind when they chose a werewolf. As for the Stop and Swap eggs, all you gotta do is find them hidden around secret areas in the levels and then bring them back to Heggy, who just so happens to be hanging around the Wicked Archipelago. You can unlock some cool rewards here, like the Spread Shot Eggs cheat, the Jinjo Radar, and the Disco Room. Rare really liked these, didn't they? But eventually, our duo make their way to Gruntilda's Haunted Water Park, which sits atop the highest peak in the Wicked Archipelago. One obligatory quiz minigame later, and we reach the top of yet another tall tower to fight Gruntilda. It's an okay boss fight. I think the fight with the Hag one might have been a better final battle. Hell, I might even prefer the final boss of the first game to this one. The first phase is mostly just avoiding different attacks until you can grab the invisibility flower power-up, then it just becomes a Breagle Blaster section. The second phase, where the duo split up and you have to keep swapping back and forth between them in order to attack Gruntilda, is really cool though. And I love that Banjo and Kazooie shout words of encouragement to each other the entire time. The final phase has Grunty possess a giant statue of herself, and to take it down, you need to use a combination of all different attacks you've learned throughout the journey, from the Bill Drill to the Breagle Buzzsaw to different egg types. It's actually pretty easy. Gruntilda is once again defeated and her spirit returns to her skull. Spiral Mountain gets thawed out, and Grunty herself gets frozen in a block of ice. Having saved the day again, our heroes decide to kick back and have a nice vacation on the shores of the archipelago. And that's Banjo-Threeie. It's not perfect, as it really does suffer from most of the issues that Banjo-Tooie did. But if you can look past those issues, you have a fun, charming, creative platformer that has a ton of content to dig into. It's not going to be for everyone. In fact, I said that it sold well enough, and it did, but it does seem to have sold less than Banjo-Tooie. I have a suspicion that may be because the game was on the original Xbox. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad system by any means, but when you think Xbox, you don't exactly think platformers, do you? Sony had platformers, Nintendo had platformers, Microsoft had Blinks the Time Sweeper, Voodoo Vince, Shrek. Besides that, if you were a fan of the Baron Bird back in their heyday, you were more than likely a Nintendo fan. Ergo, you were definitely planning to get a Nintendo GameCube for the 6th generation of consoles, and probably weren't as excited about the idea of jumping ship to Xbox. I mean, Grab by the Ghoulies is pretty much proof of that. But thanks to the Rare Replay collection, Threeie is now more accessible than ever, so now's as good a time as any to give it a shot. We all know what comes next for the franchise. In 2008, we get Nuts and Bolts, a game that to this day has not been able to escape the shadow of a YouTube review of it from 2010. Damn. This game's gonna be 20 years old soon. Then, 11 years later, just as I'm about ready to let go, Banjo and Kazooie show up in Smash, the N64 games get put on Nintendo Switch Online, and a bunch of new merch starts rolling out. But I think it's safe to assume that we won't be getting too much in the way of new content for this series moving forward. Maybe the GBA games will come to NSO, or whatever Switch 2 has, but a new game, not holding my breath. But that's okay with me. The folks at Rare are making the games that they want to make, and I would never want to shame them for that. Besides, as bad as it may seem for Banjo and Kazooie, Rayman has it way worse. So if Banjo and Kazooie are only gonna cameo in other things for the rest of time, that's fine with me, because at least those original games were pretty damn good. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time for whatever I do next time.